Okay, estimating with fractions. All right, so if we are adding and subtracting fractions, okay, this is something we have not done yet, but we can estimate. Okay, it's easy to add easy fractions or easy to subtract easy fractions. So I'll show you what I mean. When we're adding and subtracting, we're going to round, and we're only going to round to three different things, either a 0, a half, or a 1. So let's say we have something like a 1/9. Look how close it is to 0. So we would round that to 0. Something like 3/7 is close to 1/2, and so is 6/11. We would round those to a half. And something like 12 out of 13, well, if you say like 12 out of 13 slices of pizza, that's almost a whole pizza. So we can round it to 1. The general rule of thumb is, when adding and subtracting, we want to round to 0 if the numerator is less than half of the denominator. So the numerator is less than half of the denominator. When I say things like that, I mean like 2/9. Okay, half the denominator there would be like 4.5. So 2 is less than that. So basically, if the numerator is much, 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 much smaller than the denominator, you round it to 0. Another example would be like 1/8, or maybe something like 3/400. Okay, those are all examples where I would round to 0. Now, we want to round to half if the numerator is about half of the denominator, and that says about half of the denominator. So something like, I don't know, 13/25 would be a good example of where we'd round to a half, because 13 is about half of 25. Another example, we would say something like, I don't know, 6/13. 6 is about half of 13, so that would round to a half. And we want to round to a whole, or a 1, if the numerator and the denominator are about equal. Okay, so they're about the same thing. So a good example would be like 15/16, or maybe something like 336 out of 337. Whoa. Okay, big fraction, but if you notice the numerator and denominator, they're pretty much almost the same. So we'd round those to 1 because it's almost a whole. All right, next up, let's do a few examples where we're actually adding and subtracting. So in our first example, I already worked it out for you. For number 1, we have 7/8 plus 12/23. Now 7/8, those two are almost the same. 7 is almost the same as 8, so I rounded it to 1. 12/23, well, 12, it's about half of 23, so I rounded it to half. So 1 plus a half is 1.5. So adding those type of fractions aren't really that difficult. Okay, let's do another one. So we got 9/20. Now 9/20, 9 is about half of 20. So we're going to round that to a half. We're subtracting 1/5. Now 1/5, well, that's about 0. Okay, 1 is much smaller than the 5. So we're doing a half minus 0. So our answer, 1/2 minus 0, would just be 1/2. Let's do another one, now with mixed numbers. Now, mixed numbers aren't as bad as they look. Okay. For the mixed number problems, we've got 5 and 1/12 minus 2 and 7/9. Now, just round the fraction part. So the 1 out of 12, doesn't that round to 0? It does. Okay, 1 is much smaller than 12. So we would call this just 5. The fraction part rounds to 0, and you're left with the whole part, 5. So we have 5 minus. Now we have 2 and 7/9. Okay, so the 7/9, 7 is almost equal to 9. Okay, it's not that close, but we're going to go ahead and just round it up to 1. Okay, so we have a 2 and a rounded up 1, that makes a 3. So 5 minus 3 is 2. And that would be our estimate. Now for multiplying and dividing, it's just slightly different. For multiplying, we're going to round to the nearest whole number or integer. And for dividing, we just use compatible numbers. Okay, remember, numbers that are like replacement numbers that make it easy to divide, no remainders. So let's do 2 examples. We have 4 and 1/8 times 1 and 9/10. Well, 4 and 1/8, that's like saying like I ate 4 pies and then 1 out of 8 slices of another pie. So basically, you ate 4 whole pies. The one slice, that's just tiny. So we're going to keep it at 4. Round to the nearest whole number. Multiply. 1 and 9/10. Well, if you have, let's say, 1 whole pizza and then 9 out of 10 slices of another pizza, well, that's almost 2 pizzas. So I rounded it to 2. So 4 times 2, I think we all know, is 8. So a good estimate would be 8 for this fraction problem. Now for number 2, we have compatible numbers here. It's dividing. For 16 and 1/5, we don't want to round to the nearest whole number, okay, because we want numbers that will be easy to divide with no remainders at all. So 16 and 1/5, and then 2 and 3/4. Let's look at those two numbers. 2 and 3/4 is close to 3. Now what's something that's near 16 that I can divide by 3? Well, 15. So 15 divided by 3 is 5. All right. I'm Mr. Bulwark, and that was Estimating with Fractions.